Hi, I'm Barry Kirk. I'm the VP of Loyalty Solutions at Maritz Motivation. And today on the show, we're going to talk about why almost every assumption you have about why customers are loyal and how to make them more loyal need to be rethought. Join us for that conversation.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? What do you really think it takes to create loyalty? And what if it's not what you think? Well, think about that while we go into this. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes in our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We also need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there and rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday, all the way from Florida to Colorado and everywhere in between. You'll also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And you can also catch us on Spotify, Alexa, or Google Home by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that everybody talks about culture and engagement and business performance. But at the end of the day, how can we understand the very thing that drives those things, that drives culture, engagement, and business performance? And by that, I mean, what do we need to examine in the context of influence human behavior? How behavioral sciences can provide us with the tools to shape behavior that will be important to every business moving into the future. Well, we're about to find out. Our guest on this episode is Barry Kirk. Yeah, like Captain Kirk, but Barry Kirk. He is the designer of compelling customer engagement strategies that drive profound connection, loyalty, and strong business results. He applies his expertise in solving real-world challenges. His primary tools for this are from the world of human science, behavioral economics, game thinking, and the techniques from the emerging discipline of persuasive design. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Barry Kirk. And the crowd goes wild, young man. Welcome, Barry. Good to have you here, mate.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Who couldn't be excited after that opening?
I always say to my guests, you should take that recording and play it for your partner at home, because that way, when you walk in the door, it makes life a lot easier. Well, what we always like to start the show is asking, in this world of influence and often big names, who is someone we likely wouldn't know or maybe wouldn't suspect who has been a major influence on your life?
Well, I'd say somebody you definitely haven't heard of, probably because they're a little more local, but the person that actually introduced me and many of my colleagues to behavioral science as a business discipline is a person whose name is Mary Beth McEwen.
Oh.
And she is, I think, a leader in the space of something called conscious capitalism, but was actually the first person to introduce to me the idea that our assumptions about human behavior are almost entirely wrong. Especially if you're somebody whose job it is to persuade people. Yes. That in essence, almost every assumption we have about how people make decisions or decide which product to use or what company to work for are assumptions that are based on what we think happens, and yet it's not what actually happens. What actually happens is human brains way more complex and actually way more interesting than what we assume.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to diving into that with great detail. And actually, if you actually look back on the shows, if you're listening right now or watching right now, of course, we've covered many shows regarding conscious capitalism and many of the great leaders from conscious capitalism and the conscious capitalism movement. So there's a lot there for everybody to get into. On Instagram, you're listed as a St. Louis-based Tiki Bar explorer. What's your fascination with Tiki Bars?
Yes. Well, and my nickname on Instagram is Tiki Bars because that's Barry and other parts of the world, Australia for one.
Australia and Britain, you would be Baz.
Exactly.
You'd actually be Bazzer in Australia.
Okay, I liked it even better. I'll have to remember that. Well, I just had this, I was exposed to Tiki as a culture about 10 years ago when I went to this little bar in Los Angeles called Tiki Tea. That's about a 4th generation bar, believe it or not. Handed down from the period in the 40s and 50s when Tiki was like a huge thing in the United States. It was this made up thing for soldiers coming back from World War II where they could kind of still feel like they're in the South Seas. And so I kind of originally personally just adopted that. There are Tiki bars all over the place. There's been a resurgence in the United States around it now. But a lot of it's not got a particularly positive association anymore. Well, there's certain people marching with tiki lights. Yes, exactly. Different kind of tiki. Yes. We're talking about more the upside of it with like a social gathering place and creating experience. I will say though, as I got into it personally, I also began to reflect on the really unique experiences that tiki bars create that sort of take people out of their day-to-day and sort of make them feel like they've been transported. And a lot of people, when they go to a tiki bar, they want to talk about it afterwards. And I realized when I looked at those experiences, they weren't just fun for me. They were also like a signal to me of what kind of experiences people need to have, whether it's with a brand or with a company that says, that's an experience that felt different. It evokes some emotion. And I couldn't help but talk about it afterward. And isn't that what we always want with our brands is we want people to feel emotionally connected. We want them to feel like they got something unique and something that they couldn't help but share afterward with other people. Yeah, I mean, that's your whole thing, right? Around this comparison with tiki bars is that it's an emotional experience as opposed to just going to a bar. It's an emotionally evocative experience, and that you run that side by side with business and say, isn't that what you want to do in your business? Exactly. And I look at it and say, well, you're not going to be a tiki bar, but if you could take 20% of what's in those kind of experiences, right? And everybody has different ones. Some people, it might be sports. For me, it just happens to be that. Right. You could have 20% of that and sort of infuse that into a brand experience. Well, why wouldn't you do that? But you have to be super intentional about it. You have to be intentional about, am I trying to create emotion? Am I trying to build memory? Am I trying to present something that you would want other people to come and join you in next time? That can happen by accident, but almost never. It has to be intentional. Yeah, but there's an interesting thing there, Barry, because we're seeing more of this. People trying to keep their people loyal by creating these cultural environments. So they go out and they buy the foosball machine and they get the coffee and they get the bean bags and they get all that kind of shit, and then nobody uses it. Why do I certainly have a lot of theory around that, and I've written about it in my last book. But why do you think that doesn't work? Oftentimes. Yeah, I think it could be the same for a brand experience if you're trying to create that for customers. I personally think, and I'm pretty sure we'd be aligned on this, is a big part of it comes down to values. Yes. So if you have sort of this transparent value system that you are living into, that you talk to customers, employees about, and they connect to that and want to be a part of it, and then you add those elements in, then you've created something powerful and intriguing and engaging. But if you add those elements in without actually having a foundation of values that I can connect to, it's going to ring very hollow. Or it might work, but it's going to work and then not work pretty quickly, right? Because we might be intrigued by it. There's enough novelty to throwing out the beanbag or the foosball table or whatever it is that you're going to put in front of customers or employees, but it's not going to sustain their engagement because there's not something like at a deeper level happening. Yeah, and that's a really important piece, because oftentimes when going to work with companies around the loyalty and building loyalty, my last book was called Fiercely Loyal, and it's one of the things we talked about is that if you do the surface, which is the foosball machine and the coffee machine and the bean bags,
but it doesn't reflect the values of that company. It doesn't reflect what we really mean. It's not been surveyed inside of the employees. Or if you're doing it on the other side with your customers and you've done it, but you haven't bothered to actually ask, you just go, oh, this is a cool thing. People will love it, but it doesn't align. I just think people smell that bullshit from a mile away.
Yeah, they do. And I think partially, maybe 25 years ago, you could have gotten away with that. Right? People were more trusting of institutions. And we also didn't have these channels we have today where we can all be evaluating and rating everything and saying, well, did that ring hollow or was that true? And so we're so much more able now to be influenced by other people's perceptions of experiences that 25 years ago, you probably just created, and it would take a long time for people to start infiltrating a discussion of, wait a minute, does this seem real? Does this seem like it's a true expression of values? It would have taken a while. Today, you'll probably be found out within a week if that isn't accurate, right?
At the longest.
At the longest, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, let's go to Glassdoor right now. Exactly. Let's go somewhere and talk about this. Yeah. You know, you have said that you seek to act as a provocateur of the discipline of loyalty marketing. Tell us a little bit about that. I love provocateurs.
Well, yeah,
I do one myself.
I'm pretty sure you are. Yeah, and
really?
Why not be a provocateur? Like, what could be a better role to play in life? But I've been in the loyalty space for about 20 years, and when I first came in, I basically was just absorbing all these models that have been used since the 80s and saying, well, this is obviously how you build loyalty. And when I was about maybe 5 or 7 years into learning the craft, I started asking questions. Well, why do we always reduce loyalty to points? Why do we always reduce loyalty to some kind of a bribe that I give to my customer? Because, and why do we say loyalty is like this simple term? You're either loyal or you're not loyal. It certainly has to be more nuanced than that. Like I could give types of loyalty to brands. And so one of my professional goals, and here at Maritz where I work, they've been very supportive of me playing this role in the market, is being able to question those standard models that frankly worked great for the airlines in the 80s, but we've been hard pressed to replace them with better models that are more nuanced around understanding human behavior. And I just think that's an important thing to do right now. Things have changed so much in the economy and in the way we do marketing, except for the most part in loyalty programs, which look pretty similar today in many cases the way they would have if you'd launched it 20 years ago.
Well, again, the battle cry of the dying, the death rattle of the dying company is that's how we do it.
That's right. Right. And that's how it's always been done. Right?
That's always been done. That's how we do it. We're successful at it. Well, then you're already going out of business. Yeah, but you don't understand we had a $10 million profit last year. You're already going out of business.
Right.
Why? Because you're not flexible. You're not agile. You're not willing to listen. You're not willing to move, because it is a vastly different world these days.
But there's a lot of strong psychology behind defending the status quo simply because it's what you know, right? So I think
absolutely,
if we're aware of it, then we can push ourselves to say, okay, instead of defending this time, I'm going to sit down and challenge it and see what I come up with. But you have to be really intentional about that.
But you talk about in the intro, I mentioned about the loyalty experience, and you say that it's the next evolution. Tell us what you mean by that. The next evolution of loyalty programs, whether it's with employees or whether it's with customers, it's changing. So talk to us about that evolution.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that question is we tend to think in terms of, you just use the word program, and we tend to think in that term, right? Whether it's an employee engagement program, employee recognition program, or a customer loyalty program. And to me, when I hear the word program, I'm thinking, well, it's something very explicit. It's something that I have to name, I have to launch, I have to get people to sign up for, that I created some entitlement mentality because they don't want you to ever turn it off or to change it. There's a lot that comes with that. But when you really start to think about what drives loyalty with either employee or with a customer, it is never just that program if you have it. There's all kinds of other things, right? It's the quality of your products and services. It's the brand image that you present to the market. It's your value system that you have there. It's the interaction that I have with your customers. And in fact, you could have the best loyalty program in the world and have a sub-optimized customer experience when they interact with your employees. And that loyalty program is probably going to be meaningless. Because I'm going to say I had a bad experience with your employee today, and that trumps the likelihood that I put my focus on your loyalty program. So we tend to think in terms of loyalty experience, which is not just a single program, but what are all those different elements that are interacting together that begin to create loyalty? And it's never just a single program. I mean, I wish it was, because that would make life a lot easier for everybody in business, but it just isn't that simple.
But now let's sort of go a little deeper into this, because when I think about these things, I can clearly see that, even simple websites have chatbots, and we're seeing more and more AI, and we're seeing more of these auto systems, which, if any of us have ever picked up a phone and heard a digital message or an automated message and been kept on hold with some horrible music or some other shit that says, if you press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and then you get through to the wrong department, and then they transfer you 18 times. Talk to us about how that, first of all, how that aligns with business and customers. And then second of all, how, I feel like so much of that is still true even in the employee engagement piece, which is that so much of it, we're trying to push it off. And I feel my work, I believe, without doubt, is actually we need to take it on. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a very complex question right now. What I'm convinced is not the right answer is people falling in love with the technology and saying that's the answer, right? Right. Especially AI, which I think is very powerful and something we should be using more, but it's not the answer to everything. I'm a marketer, and so I love data. Right. I love behavior more than anything, because I can use that to predict future behavior. I can understand better what people like and don't like. But it isn't everything about them. And so when I look at AI, and when I work with my colleagues around that, oftentimes what we try to do is think of AI in particular as, and this is going to sound a little odd, but putting the human being at the center of your experience. And let me explain why I say that, because it sounds like the opposite, right? When you think of AI, it's like, it's putting the algorithm at the center of the experience, and the algorithm takes over. So like a simple example of that is I use Waze, the GPS app, right? Every day I use it. And our head of decision sciences told me, you got to use this app because the AI is great. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I said, great. So maybe I'd been using it like a month. And one morning, I backed out of my garage to pull onto the street. And that day, instead of having to go in and select where I was heading, Waze popped up a little message and said, are you heading to work at Maritz? And all I had to hit was, okay. And I marveled at that. And it didn't take me long to figure it out. Like, oh, okay. So Waze, after enough usage, figured out that the likelihood was that if I'm pulling out of that GPS location at that time of the morning on a weekday, the high probability was I was heading to work. So Waze figured out what I hadn't asked it to do. But once it had figured that out, I thought, well, now I hope you're doing this every day for me. I should never have to ask this again, right? So there's a complex AI happening there that actually made the experience better for me by learning what I needed and anticipating what I might like even before I asked for it. And to me, that's the power of the technology is figure out what the customer wants and needs, maybe before they know it, and to begin serving up that more relevant experience. It's not about removing the humanity from the experience at all. It's about putting that human being at the center of it, for sure.
Yeah, and so often I think we're losing that. As you said, I think people become enamored, I think is the right word, with it, with technology, with the idea of, it's going to make life easier. But, if you're of a certain age, you can remember being at school and being told that, by the time you reach 50, people will only be working 2 days a week if they want to, and they'll be taking their breakfast in a pill, and they'll take their lunch in a pill, and they'll take their dinner in the pill, and we'll sleep in pods, and, yeah, it's all very sci-fi, but it's not reality. And the reality of it is that it's about human psychology. And I speak a lot on this, and I know you do, which is the psychology of leadership and the psychology of loyalty specifically. So let's go into that psychology piece, because where we started out in this conversation was this misinterpretation of what loyalty really is that it's a bunch of rational things. i.e., this is cheap and cheaper than that, and that is from this company and this is from that company, so obviously people will buy what's cheaper. No, I actually know people who will not buy exactly the same product because it comes from that store.
Right.
They will not go into that store. I remember being in a supermarket with this person I knew, and she was buying cornflakes. I mean, it was Kellogg's cornflakes, right? So it's a very simple brand. And I said, you could probably get that at the superstore cheaper. And she goes, I wouldn't be seen dead in there. Right? And that was it, right? There was a whole status about not being in that place. Now, there's nothing logical and nothing rational about that. And I think it's a wonderful example of why she was so loyal to Whole Foods with exactly the same brand. It just didn't make any. So I was like, wow, that's a really interesting piece of psychology there. When it comes to this, I don't know how far you and I can go down this road, but it's one of my favorite subjects, which is looking at cult mentality. I studied cult mentality. I was understand it. I actually worked in de-radicalizing cult members and did that kind of stuff. But marketing for me around loyalty, and even loyalty inside of an organization, is actually about understanding cult mentality, because one of the things we talk about with companies is a culture. First part of that word is a cult. Yeah. And a cult has a set of rules around it, just like any other cult, whether that cult is called Judaism, Christianity, or the Muslim faith, or whether it's called the Scientology, or whether it's called Whole Foods.
Right.
It has a set of rules that people follow. Talk to us about that in the way that, because I know that's one of your areas of really digging into.
Yeah, and I think it really goes back to that question of when we say loyalty, what are we really talking about? And
right.
we use that word a lot of times in ways that sucks the meaning out of it, or we're not talking about the nuance of it. So you mentioned earlier, somebody making a decision around a brand that isn't rational. And I think that's absolutely right. I think we do that a lot. But I think the tendency when you say that to somebody is, oh yeah, people aren't rational around their brand choices, is they assume that means, oh, so they're irrational. And I tend to say from my experience interacting with behavioral science folks is that, no, it means we're more than rational. It doesn't mean we get rid of rationalization altogether, but we can make decisions that are more than just a rational transactional choice, right? So
that's an interesting way of looking at it, isn't it? More than rational.
More than rational, because it doesn't.
Because the other way is minimizing.
That's right.
And sort of saying, it's just emotional stuff.
Yes.
But this is more than. It's an add, not a minus.
Plus, I will say, if you're trying to have this conversation with other people in your company who maybe are not as open to it, trying to convince them that even they make irrational choices is not going to go over well. But if you say to them, even you make more than rational choices, don't you connect emotionally? Don't you connect because of a tribe, et cetera? They're more likely to be receptive to that as an approach. And that's why I'm very much in agreement with you that we have to elevate the word loyalty in a way that says there are, first of all, multiple types. We actually have a model here at Maritz called the multi-loyalty framework, which is an intentional way to push ourselves when we're doing loyalty work into saying, okay, which type of loyalty am I talking about? And there are probably 10 or 20 types of loyalty. We just deal with 4 of them, but 2 you've already mentioned. One, which is mercenary loyalty, which is frankly when people do say, I'm here just because it's cheapest, biggest discount, most points rewards, right? And sometimes I do think that is the case. People will make that choice, right? So what we call that mercenary loyalty, sometimes we affectionately refer to it as the bribe. And it works, but the problem with attracting your employees or your customers that way is it's pretty easy for your competitor to disrupt that. They just have to offer a little bit more, right? Just a bigger discount, a little more salary, et cetera. But if you're in the box you're talking about, which is, we do actually call that cult loyalty. Sometimes we call it tribal loyalty.
Yeah.
But when we talk about that, a lot of times people say, oh, okay, I understand what you mean there. You mean people who are just like irrationally attached to a brand. And we say, again, no, that's not what we're talking about. We say that what happens there is that essentially a customer says, I have a set of values that guide my life. And now I'm looking for brands that I feel mirror those back to me. And when I find that brand, I'm going to be more attached. In fact, I might actually pay more than I would elsewhere because of the values connection. And then the final step is, and now I look for other people that seem they get the same thing. And so I always tell people, like, I'm a big Apple guy. I'm more than just a fan. It's like part of my lifestyle. And I put an Apple sticker on the back of my car. I am one of hundreds of thousands of people who do that. People are always like, why do you have an Apple sticker? It's like an advertisement. I said, yes, advertisement for me to other Apple people on the highway. So it's like a little ritual where we're signaling to each other, right? Like I get it. So I totally agree with you. It's that whole idea that like, there's a culture there that the cult has to be built around. But if you could get there, that's way better loyalty than the loyalty that says I have to continually, feed that idea of the cheapest price or the biggest discount, et cetera.
Well, as you said, if you're going on that mercenary way, then I offer you $5 an hour more, you're gone.
Right.
I offer you 20 cents off, you're gone. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And it's a really great way to go out of business, because you are always loyalty is based on a commoditized platform that will always have to get cheaper or pay more versus what's better. I honestly don't. I mean, I'm an Apple fan. I'm speaking to you on Apple right now. I have my iPhone right here. I'm all Apple. Like my wife says, once you go Mac, you never go back. But and at the same time, I'm not sure it's better than Android. I'm not. I've got friends who are Android freaks and they love it, and I'm not sure it's better, but it's fascinating to me to watch the loyalty piece around it.
Right.
Because, and as you said, I mean, a lot of people are, this is what Jobs was masterful at, right? If you look at the psychology of Jobs as a leader, he was a terrible leader. He had shit ways of managing people. He was a genius, no doubt about it, but he was a terrible leader in the way that he led people. But he was so, he certainly had charisma. Nobody's going to deny that. But he was so good at getting people to be loyal to this idea of innovation.
That's right. Right.
And it was like, well, I'm about innovation, so I'm with Apple. Yeah, but he treats people terrible. It doesn't matter. And it's always interesting to me, because you brought up something very important around loyalty, is there is always, whether it's conscious or unconscious, there is always a values assessment. This is the work we do with companies. There's a values assessment. And if you don't meet the values assessment, they will walk away. What's more is they will tolerate terrible things if there's a values assessment. Yeah. And the example of that, because I'm now going to be politically incorrect, the example of that is, that's a warning in case you don't like politically incorrect, you can now turn off, is that there is a person who lives in a big white house in Washington, D.C., that people do not like, but voted for and would vote for again, because the values assessment that matters to them is an economic one. And so they vote based on economics because that's their highest level of values. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's not. But it's understanding that we have to recognize that again, is what you were saying, Barry, is that values is not rational.
Right.
It's more than rational.
It's more than rational. It's not an irrational choice. It's obviously, probably the thing that holds society together in most ways, right? And I think, though, that the risk of connecting at the level of values, though, is if you violate those values in some way, right? If you say, I'm about this and connect to me that way, and then we find out you're not about that. So if you're a brand that says, I'm all about the environment, and then we find out, you're using child labor and polluting rivers, then you're going to lose right at that point. So there is some risk. I wanted to add that I think on Steve Jobs, the one thing I think is amazing about him was he actually was smart, or his leadership with them, about actually evoking multiple types of loyalty. So I think originally he was about the cult of Mac, the Apple fanboys and all that, right? That's where they started. If you want to be innovative, you use those products. But as they wanted to grow their market base, they shifted into something that we call true loyalty, which is loyalty to the experience. He said, even if you don't really buy into the cult, well, you buy into these amazing products. And in fact, you'll pay too much. Like, you can get a comparable Dell for way less, but you want to be part of like the beauty of this design, the beauty of the OS. But you mentioned one more that we actually have a word for too, which we call inertia loyalty, which is where I feel a little bit stuck. And I think, like, I'm an Apple person, right? Like you, and I've often thought, like, somebody's Android phone looks pretty sweet. Like, the camera looks really good. And then I think, how would I ever insert an Android phone into the ecosystem of all my other Mac products. And I don't even know what to do with that. And so there's some inertia there too, right? I feel like I still love Apple, but even if I didn't, I might be a little bit stuck because we're that far in the relationship. So the idea of saying you've got to figure out the one type of loyalty that you are supposed to be engendering is actually too limited of you. You should be trying to figure out multiple
I think
types
is
of
a
loyalty.
great point, Barry, right there. Is that, you know, as you started out right at the beginning, which is loyalty is not a single thing. It is these multiple facets. And if you can get people on the multiple facets, and it doesn't have to be all of them, but multiple facets, then you're much more likely to get, because as you said, you know, I've got people working with me who do things, and they do so many things in my company. And I'm like, if I decided to replace that person, oh my God, that would be hell. So yeah, there's a couple of things that are a bit iffy, but I'm kind of going to, and that's very often what happens inside of a company is we're keeping people who are doing some things average, but they do other things that are really spectacular, but they've also got their fingers in other pies, and you're like, that would be difficult.
Right.
And it's the same thing with, like, you know, well, if I get an Android phone, how am I going to sync all that stuff? I can't.
That's right.
Oh no, forget it.
I'm sure it works, but I have no idea how to do it. Yeah.
I mean, you know, your Android tablet looks way better than mine, but I can't. My iPad is connected to my computer. It's connected to my phone. It's connected to your iPad. What am I gonna do?
But I do think a lot of times about brands who are relying on inertia, like they build a whole model. And so I think the really good example of that was the yellow cab companies for years, right? We didn't have a choice. If you got on an airport, you had to climb a yellow cab. The experience was almost always awful, but you just put up with it. And then Uber comes along and disrupts the inertia. Now, Uber's got a corollary problem of their own, right? Which is around culture and values, right?
Yes.
So they've got that tension going between they disrupted somebody else's inertia by creating a better experience. So they've got experience-based loyalty, but now people are starting to second think Uber because of issues they potentially have around culture. So it is always this nuanced expressions of different ways that the consumers and your employees can connect. You can't just boil it down into this sort of monolithic idea of on or off, you know, binary. It's never binary.
No, I love that you're actually bringing our attention to that. I think it's really important. Let's talk about game thinking, because I think that's a very interesting area of certainly of industrial psychology, of business psychology, of marketing, and of loyalty. We all, you know, we're hearing this whole thing around game theory and gamification of what it is we do and how we do it. Talk to us about what you see that as, particularly as it evolves into the future.
Yeah, so gamification was actually something that I did solely for a while. It was like I stepped out of the loyalty industry for a few years and worked for a startup that just did gamification, but helping that startup figure out how to apply it. And so for a long time, it was thought of just as a technology. Like you have like this platform that does game something. People rarely completely understand it. But the real idea that's powerful behind game design, game thinking, gamification is you look at what game designers intuitively do. They create very immersive, possibly you might want to use the word addictive experiences that are today almost always socially based. They have mastery built into it. They have a little bit of surprise. They have progress built in that you know where you are. Everything that we really should be doing in employee and customer experiences are right there in games. And that's why games do so well. And so the idea is to say, well, I have my own game. I don't need to create another game. I have a game. My game is I sell things to a customer and I want them to buy them. Or my game is I have a company and employees come every day and they work here. That's your game. Can you make that game more immersive, more progress seeking, more mastery building, more socially connected? And that's really the core idea of applying game thinking, game design to an existing experience. And a lot of times people think, no, I have to create some new game. Like, no, you have a game. Just it's a metaphor for your business, for your employee experience. And how do you make that more engaging and apply the psychology that a game designer would? Because I oftentimes ask people, if you can accept for a moment that your company has its own game, how good is that game? Does anybody really want to play that game? And if you held it to the same standards of great games, which are social and exciting and award, based and all that stuff that makes games interesting, most of the time they have to admit, no, our game sucks. It's not a good game at all. Why are people here playing it?
So the key factors of gamification are, of course, reward, right? We know that, right? Yep. Mastery. What else is there?
Progress.
Progress, of course.
Right. So the
progress.
feeling that I'm moving forward on something. So mastery is important, but I have to know where I am in that cycle. Another would be social connection. And in social connection, you have subsets. And these are what, by the way, these are what we call game dynamics. People oftentimes focus on game mechanics like points and leaderboards. That's the easiest thing to apply. The game dynamics are what we're talking about, the psychology, right? So in social connection, well, maybe your social connection ought to be competition, or maybe it should be cooperation. And you have to figure out the value system of your business, which one is actually the more powerful one for that, right?
Because it could be competition, but it could also be collaboration.
It could be both, absolutely. But you better know which audience to put which type of social connection in front of them at the right time. Otherwise, it can seem like you have an experience that doesn't ring true to the experience that the customer expected or the employee expected.
So let's just go to our viewers and our listeners for a moment and say, okay, so you've got a business, you're running this business, you're doing okay with loyalty, but not great, because there's very few companies that are doing great, but you're doing pretty good. What would you say to get them started in shifting that loyalty over using game thinking? What would be the first thing? I mean, like you said, you say, okay, think of it as a game, but what would be the first practical thing they could do?
Yeah. So the first thing, just from mindset, I'd say is don't assume that, well, I have a game that my employees play. They come to work every day and they do that. And I have a game that my customers play, because they're really the same thing, right? People too often separate those out. So on one side, they say, well, HR is in charge of this game and marketing is in charge of this game. But your customers just see it as one experience. I interact with your brand, your products, and your employees, right? So they're not separating that out. So that's the first place I'd start, is recognizing that you have that. And then the first thing I would do after that is what I call deconstructing your experience for its existing game mechanics, right? So if you have a loyalty program, you already have a gamified customer experience. What is a loyalty program? It's tiers and it's points and it's rewards, right? It's little missions you ask people to do, like buy this thing this month and get more points. So you've already gamified that experience. So the first thing you have to do is sort of acknowledge that, like, oh yeah, we didn't intentionally think of it as designing a game, but that's exactly what we did. We layered this thing on top of our existing experience. And I would do the same thing on the employee side, right? So it might be less intentional there, but you may have things like the way that I get promoted up through your company is in and of itself a game. Like I have things that I have to achieve in order to even be considered for that. And do I even have tiers that I can move up through the company, right? It's easy when we're in school. Everything's a well-designed, structured game. Like you go from grade to grade to grade to grade. And then we get into the employee world and it all sort of falls away. The structure isn't there anymore, right? So that would be my most practical sort of suggestion, is don't decide, oh, we need to add some element, because you're going to know that. Is what is the experience you have today? Begin to deconstruct that. And it'll almost immediately reveal itself as these are the things we need to work on to do better.
So is that different? Do you see that as being different than persuasive design?
Okay, so persuasive design is a way you could approach that. But when we use that in our consulting work here at Maritz, it has a particular definition for it. So we actually separate the word persuasion from manipulation. And I've actually had huge arguments with people about this who say they're the same. But I think for me, they're different in terms of intentionality.
Yes.
So manipulation is I'm trying to get you to believe a certain thing or act a certain way without you knowing that that's what I'm trying to do. And in persuasion, I'm being totally transparent. I am trying to persuade you right now that there's a difference between persuasion and manipulation. I'm not hiding that fact, right? So we talk about the need, when you're creating these better experiences for employees and customers, to think in terms of persuasion, which means transparent and non-manipulative. And that's really hard. Businesses like to think in terms of, how do I get you to do this? How do I trick you into thinking X? How do I make you think this is more valuable than it is, right? And I think that's too easy for customers and employees to see through now. We talked about that.
Certainly now, yeah.
There are too many ways for that to be exposed, and be exposed with one tweet, it all falls apart. So far better that you would start with the idea of persuasive design is, I'm going to go in with, I want everybody to win. I want you to win. I want me to win. That's the only way this works. And whatever design I'm going to do, it's going to be in a transparent, non-manipulative manner, and then see how that works. And we've seen over and over again, it works really, really well, because people feel like they can trust the business then when they see that happening. But you can use that for gamification. You could say, well, how do I want to play game mechanics? We'll do it in a way that I'm not trying to trick people into doing something, because that never sustains itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the whole psychology of persuasion, Cialdini's work, which was superb around that, and many others too. We can go off in all kinds of tangents around persuasion technology, which I, again, find very fascinating. But it's there's a great deal of difference, as you say, between the persuasive and the manipulative. And I think you pointed out importantly that the major difference is transparency.
Right.
The major difference is, hey, here's what I want to do. I want to get your vote. I want to get your vote, whether you're voting with your feet, whether you're voting with your ballot, or whether you're voting with your dollar, or or you're voting with your willingness to show up at work and be engaged, right? So whatever it is, I want your vote, and here's how I'm looking to win it, as opposed to the other way around. And I still think that the other way around still works. I don't want to disparage that, because I do think it still works. I just don't think it has any integrity. And I think that it works, but it's a short-term win, not a long-term win. And short-term gain always ends in long-term pain, right? That's all there is to it. So shifting to say, look, here's the short-term pain. You're going to do this with me, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Your things are not going to sync together, and it's going to be a little bit hard. But here's why this is going to work better for you over a period of time.
Yeah.
And to measure that out on a long term. But we are, going the other way to the argument here, Barry, and that's what I want to bring back to you, is that we are an instant gratification society.
Yes, we are.
Right? So talk to us about that dichotomy. Right? Yeah. You and I can see short-term pain, long-term gain, but we're an instant gratification society, and that is fed every single day with a hit of dopamine when somebody goes, "Oh, I like Barry's tweet."
Yeah. Well,
the buzzer was on it today.
That's right.
Like,
But tomorrow, maybe not so much. Yeah. Well, one thing I like about that is you acknowledging that we're an instant gratification society, because I think too often that's a label that's put on just one segment of the population, which is millennials, as if for some reason millennial psychology is any different than anyone else's. And if anything, I've said the difference between millennials and, say, Gen Xers or boomers is we simply have developed more tools to deliver on the desire for instant gratification than we've ever had.
Absolutely.
If we could have had all this stuff instantly 20 years ago, we all would have wanted it instantly, right? But it just wasn't possible, right? So that is nothing about millennials that's any different than anyone else.
No.
So it's an understandable part of psychology. It's literally how the brain is wired.
Absolutely.
Survival, right? If you saw the food, you got to eat it now because it may not be there tomorrow. That's how we were wired from, the beginnings of humanity, right? So the interesting thing about that, though, is some psychology that I came across recently about why do we make so many short-term decisions? Why do we do that as businesses? Why do we do that as consumers, as employees? And here was the interesting thing. They've done a number of studies where they had people in an fMRI machine checking out brain activity, and they had the individual talk about themselves. So answer questions about yourself, talk about yourself. And there's an area in the front of the brain that activates, during that period. So they kind of know, like, that's the part of your brain that activates when you're talking about yourself. Then they would have the same person answer questions about a complete stranger. And when they did that, they would see this area in the front of your brain doesn't light up anymore, doesn't activate, but some area back here activates. Okay, so those two things, you and a complete stranger. Now, here's the third part. The third part was, now I'm going to ask you questions about your future self. A week from now, a month from now, 5 years from now. And guess what part of the brain lit up on that? When I said, I'm talking about my future self, not this part that lit up before when I talked about myself. Now that part that activates when I think about a stranger lights up. And what that says is we look at our future self as a stranger. We don't know that person. And so when we're asked to not do things in the moment, like asked to defer a reward, defer a promotion, defer a purchase, right? To get a better deal if we just wait longer. Well, that person we're deferring for isn't me.
It doesn't exist. Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It's some future version of myself that I don't recognize, that I don't know. And so I'm like, why am I delaying my current gratification for that guy that I don't know? Now, that's an interesting bit of psychology. I wouldn't want to overinterpret it, but what it says is if we don't understand how core that is to the way the brain works, then we misinterpret how to design instant gratification and balance it with delayed gratification. They're both really important, but you got to get that balance right. And we just put a value judgment on instant gratification, like those are people who can't control themselves. And that's not the way the brain works at all.
No, not at all. And this is why, high level of emotion, and I do make the classification, high level emotional intelligence is so important. When I say high level emotional intelligence is at its basis self-knowledge. Mm-hmm. It's not, I can see what's going on with Charlie over there. It's actually self-knowledge. Right. And the self-knowledge would include the ability to recognize fully, clearly, this is who I was, and this is the behaviors that manufactured that personality. This is who I am, which is still flooring and still behaving in some of those ways, and I'm looking to evolve. And here's who I want to be, and getting very clear about that so that I can identify, well, if I do that, I get to be this person that I want to be. But most people don't exist in that realm. Right. 99.9% of people are operating in this realm, which is, I'm tired, I'm going to sleep, I'm horny, can I get laid, I'm hungry, where can I get something to eat? I mean, it's basic human caveman survival stuff. There's nothing sophisticated about it. You might be wearing an Armani suit, but you're still a freaking caveman in the operational system. Your iOS is poor.
And I think the other thing that you point out about that's really important is you can learn all this behavioral science information and think that you can apply it. But if you don't first try to see how it applies to you, then you're never going to understand how it applies to other people. You've got to really look at yourself first. And then you can begin to reflect, I understand now how, when I apply that to my audience, whether they're my employees or my customers, I have more insight into what's going to work and not work. But if you're thinking of it's just for other people, right? I'm the rational actor. That's what a lot of business people think. Well, I'm rational because I'm in the business place. And this doesn't apply to me, but I will use it to persuade or manipulate my customers, my employees. That's not going to work because you haven't figured out yet how it applies to a human being, namely yourself. That's where I totally agree with that. You have to start there before you can do anything else with it.
Well, in the context of self-reflection, I truly believe that great leaders, and by that what I mean is, they might be political, they might be business, they might be mothers. I mean, I'm not just leaders. Leaders to me, great leaders to me, are always self-reflective. They are always growing. They're always looking at themselves and looking at how they can be better. And because of that, they're also willing to be vulnerable about that. So what was one thing that you did for a long time that actually blocked you from your levels of success? What do you think that was?
Yeah, and I think it's very relevant to what we've been talking about. I think I was aware for a long time that there was a need in the business world to think in people more in terms of them being human beings rather than, in roles. But I mostly kept it to myself. I come from a family, I'm the only person I come from a large family of 10 kids. And everybody else is either blue collar or they're doing helping professions, like they're teachers, psychologists, ministers. That's what I come from, a long line of people like that, right? So here I come into the business world from this very different kind of family that isn't in the business world. And I've been always trained to think in terms of people as human beings, in terms of psychology, in terms of connecting the values. And yet I was convinced, because of what I saw around me, I needed to keep that to myself. That belief that you don't stop being a human being when you walk into the business world, that you put values aside and replace those with the values of whatever's being sold this week or whatever you're buying. And it was a long time in my career before I think I was mature enough and had the confidence to say, I'm going to start saying that that's what I believe here. And then I found, compatriots who believe that too, and discovered conscious capitalism. But the moment I kind of crossed that threshold was when I started using this phrase that I use oftentimes now, which is consumers are human beings first. Yeah. And I say that all the time. I say that with clients. I say when I speak in the marketplace, which seems like a really sort of not very intuitive statement. It's like, well, of course they are, like you see them as humans, but it's saying, I don't want to reduce you to consumption. That's a very reductive term, even consumer, that I understand that you're a fully formed human being and you don't put that aside when you come to work at a company or when you go to buy a product. In fact, if anything, if I can tap into those things, you become more informed. But I, for a long time in business, did not feel I was senior enough or accomplished enough to say those things without feeling like there'd be so much pushback that people would think I was crazy. And I think it's easier today But it was something I definitely had to sort of have the courage one day to sort of cross that threshold. And it's hard to go back once you've done it, of course.
But I think, you know, this is the thing, is that I've been speaking for 35 years, and I've been speaking about pretty much the same thing for 35 years in different, you know, obviously I hope my knowledge base has evolved and my understanding has evolved, but I'm still pretty much talking about the same thing. But when I talked about it 35 years ago, I was a nutter.
Right.
Exactly. This guy's whacked. You know, he's talking about crazy shit like psychology and business. Come on.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's about the bottom line. No. People are at the base of every company, every industry, and every consumer. That's it. It's people.
Yes.
And if you don't understand people, then I don't care how clever you are. You go, but blue is very good in marketing to men. Well, that may be true. Men may have a favorite color of blue, but you know what? If you put blue things and you share values that don't match, they still aren't buying. No matter how many shades of blue you decide to use. Yeah. It's kind of, but it's a fascinating piece. And I think, you know, what you're saying there is really important, is that we have to have the courage to say what's true for us and be willing to test it. You know, one of the things I did a wonderful interview recently for my other show, and we were talking about what science is. And what people think science is. And science is skepticism, but skepticism is not negativity. True skepticism means I'm willing to be proven wrong. Absolutely. I'm willing to question it. And that when you write a thesis, you put the thesis out for everybody to take pot shots at, but they can't do it from opinion. They have to do it from, here's the data. Well, here's where the data's off a little bit. And I think that we're not often courageous enough to do that. We're so afraid. Again, we're back to this basic psychology of the way the parts of the brain work, and reptilian part of the brain and survival, and like, ooh, they could reject me and I'll be out of the tribe, which is very powerful in the most sophisticated people in the world. It's still there.
Yeah.
And really understanding that it takes courage to lead.
It does.
Say your truth.
And part of that, I think, is that you do have that fear that when I step out in front and express some strong opinion, that somebody's going to tell you you're a dumbass and don't know what you're talking about, right? That can happen. You have to be okay with that.
I don't think it can happen. I think it will happen.
It will happen, exactly.
And I think that for me was what got me over my stuff. Was one of my great mentors said to me, you know, what are you afraid of? And I said, well, they think I'm stupid. And he goes, they do already. And I went, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, there are people out there that think you're stupid.
Yeah.
And he said, what do you know? And I said, well, I know I'm not stupid. And he goes, then why are you worried about them? And he goes, you got to learn this, that anybody who is going to make a difference, are you committed to making a difference, Dov? Yes. Anybody who make a difference is going to get attacked. That's it.
Yep.
And if you're not being attacked, you're actually not making a difference.
That's exactly right. I get asked sometimes by people, like, you know, I get the term thought leader thrown at me. I'm sure you do. I don't love that term, but it is what it is. But people say, like, how do you do that? And I said, well, the very first thing you have to do, you have to have very strong opinions for people to disagree with, because otherwise you're not leading anything, right? So it's not that they're disagreeing is the issue. It's your lack of anything for them to disagree with is the problem. You have
Absolutely.
Interesting if there's nothing for them to refute or to pivot on or anything else. It's really important. And I do think companies have that issue around thought leadership as well, which is they produce wonderful white papers and content, and then they want you to jump through hoops to get access to it. And in my opinion, you know, you need to get some of it out into the market. Like we do that when I talk about loyalty, not all of it, but some of it needs to be out there so people can react to it. It has little value when you just hold it in to yourself and say, well, really smart, trust this. You want it out there where your competitors can react to it. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
At least there's something for them to react to.
One of my principles of leadership that we teach and work with companies on is you don't need to build a wider fence. You need to build a narrower fence so you can push people off it. It's not to accommodate more people. It's to push people off it. Yeah. Like, oh, not for us, great. With us, fantastic. Not for us, fabulous. And that's okay, because you cannot please everybody all the time. But the ones you are pleased, you want to create that cult, that cultural mentality of, I want to be here. I love these people. I love what they're about. I love the feel of the iPhone, or I love the feel of an iPad. I mean, you have to look even in with those contexts. I mean, like I said, I think other companies probably doing it better, but it's interesting that they all followed that model.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is where Apple will die, is if they don't stay innovative, not only in the technology, but in the look, because that's one of the things that I think people forget, is that Apple was technologically a million miles ahead of everybody else, but they were also design a million miles ahead of that.
That's right.
And
different.
That, as you said, that experience was like, oh my God, this feels so different. and that for me is when I look at Apple, I go, ooh, that's where you're on thin ice, lads. You've not really moved the design levels up. You got to move the innovation up. You're not really done that. You've added an extra camera, okay, but you got to move the design up so it's like, ooh, this is delicious. Really, right?
No, I think you're right. And I think part of that's going to be for Apple or any other company to recognize that you can get so enamored with AI, with data, with tech. And again, marketing guy, I love all that. And I do think companies are going to have AI to succeed as we move forward. It's going to be, but the companies that I think are going to do the best with AI, with data and all that, are the ones that don't also lose the sight of the fact that it's all about humans at the end of the day. It's reconnecting back to a compelling human experience for your employees, for your customers, because AI can't sell to another AI. You're selling to a customer, right? People who connect with people are people. And so I think you're going to see companies succeeding moving forward, not because they mastered AI or data. That's sort of table stakes. It's important. Some will do it better than others, but the ones that can do that and retain some sense of the human experience in it. And that's where I think Apple's got to step up, is recognizing it's not just about the data, but what was it about Steve Jobs and what he created there that made people excited to be part of owning that product, because they thought they were joining into something that other people hadn't quite tapped into yet. And I think they've got to keep working at it to make sure they don't lose that just as they release the next iPhone and the next iPhone.
Well, you know, and it's one of the things there are many things I don't like about Amazon. But one of the things I really respect about Jeff Bezos was a comment he made about a month ago, maybe two. And he said, we're going bankrupt. And people were like, no, you made billions of dollars. And he goes, no, not now.
Someday, right.
But eventually.
Yes.
And he goes, our job is to always stay ahead of that.
Yeah.
And what that means is he understands what disruption really is. And what happens is that very often, I mean, Nokia was the #1 phone company in the world. Who the hell owns a Nokia anymore, right? Apple came along and disrupted them enormously. People have forgotten that. Yeah. And one of the things what I say is, you know, Netflix disrupted Blockbuster. Yeah. Exactly. Who did Blockbuster disrupt? My mate who had a video store in Australia. He went out of business. And people forget that the disruptors will be disrupted. That's right. If they get complacent. And one of the things I love about what you're talking about with loyalty is if you keep interacting with the people, you won't get complacent, because they will actually let you know, here's where you're off track, or here's what we're hungry for that was the brilliance of Jobs, is he went, I'm not even going to think about what you think you want, but what you don't know you want yet.
That's right.
That's very high risk. And I'm sure a lot of people went, oh, you're a nutter to him all the time. Right.
Well, and the core of that is that question of what do you want, which is not what do I want to sell you, right? And I do think that's another core component of persuasion. Persuasion. So good politicians figure out what is important to you, and then they try to convince you they'll deliver on that, right? I think brands get that backwards a lot, though. They're like, well, this is what we want to manufacture and sell. So how do I convince you? That's that whole Mad Men era, right? How do you convince somebody that they should buy it, rather than saying, well, what is it you want or need? And if we're providing that in an interesting or socially connected way or a surprising way or provocative way, then I don't have to really work so hard to convince you to buy it.
Right.
That's a big piece of it. I do think that gets forgotten a lot in the business world, is starting with the customer and the employee. If I just deliver on what you think is important, you're going to be a retained employee, or you're going to be a customer who keeps coming back and buying again and again.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation. We're going to jump into our lightning round, and then I'm going to ask you for some practical advice, and then tell us where we can find out more about you and all the resources you offer. But for now, let's start here. What is a guilty pleasure for you?
Oh, a guilty pleasure for me is YouTube. I can get into a YouTube hole pretty easily and come out of it like 4 hours later, just having gotten to the weirdest stuff on YouTube. That is something I love to do.
Well, now you've opened that door. What kind of weird stuff? Because you use the word weird, so
Yeah,
it just that has to be asked. What kind of weird stuff?
it could be anything from like obscure documentaries about that were shown to teenagers in the 50s about how to be like healthy kids, to Tiki videos. There's absolutely those out there. To stuff about weird places to visit the United States. I actually love those to see where I should go on vacations, like weird places that are off the beaten path that you go. But I do think it's a really smart thing YouTube does, is it draws you into their experience, and it's easy to do reports later.
Yep, I will admit that happens for me too. What is something that really can make you cry laughing?
Cry laughing. I would have to say, so I'm just going to name a show right now that I think is like that. There's a HBO drama called Succession, which is all about a rich family.
I know the show.
And it is the most inappropriate humor I have heard on TV in a long time, which I find just hilarious and I think is amazing and funny, and everybody should watch that show. It's really, really good.
It's actually a very good show. As a, like I said, I do a lot of work in the family business space, and as one of my friends in that world says, yeah, it's like the clown makeup of family business.
That's true. Yeah.
It's like, it's a great analogy. It's like, it's really there.
Yeah.
Big,
Right.
but it's really, that's very cool. Before we finish, I know that I asked you a little bit earlier, but is there one more piece of practical guidance you would like to leave our viewers, our listeners with, that they could just like walk out today and go, you know what, I'm going to do this? What would that thing be?
Yeah, so here's what I would suggest. And I suggest this oftentimes when people ask me this question. If you're the person at your company who today was handed the assignment, figure out customer loyalty, whatever problem we're having, figure it out. Is it a program? Is it a strategy? What are we supposed to do? And come back and deliver a presentation and tell us what to do. And you're like, crap, now what? I would start with this. Make a list. Just make a list in front of you of everything that you're loyal to. And I don't just mean brands. It could be institutions. It could be religions. It could be people. It could be ideas. And then unpack that. Why am I loyal to that? What are the qualities there that are making me loyal? And then turn around and try to apply that thought, those ideas, to your own business. I guarantee you, when you go back into your executive team and make that presentation, you will be way more excited about that. You'll be way more engaged and way more committed to your ideas, because you know they come from a very authentic place. You didn't just start with, do I need points or do I not need points? Do I need to give a discount or not? You're actually connecting with your own self at a human level, so you can convey those ideas about your customers at a human level. I think that'd be a place to start. That's
a great exercise. That is a great exercise. I'm excited to hear what people do with that. That's pretty fabulous. Well, Barry, it's been a pleasure having you here, mate. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you and your company offer.
Yeah, so easy to find all our resources. They're at maritz.com, maritz.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Barry Kirk.
And remember, he's the Tiki guy, right? And you get there. So at Barry Kirk on Twitter, but also maritz.com. And of course, we'll put all that in the show notes. Again, thank you to Barry Kirk for being with us. Thank you, sir. And you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to either our LinkedIn or our Facebook groups and just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. Find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Barron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization. Simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Be aware that the research consistently shows that the fastest growing companies face exactly the same challenges as you do. They're spending time, money, energy, and effort attracting, training, and developing top talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're frustrated with investing in training and developing your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com. where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets in your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what real loyalty is and how it is not a thing, but it is a whole set of great things. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your life, in your business, and your leadership impact. And I am out.